There was a fly walking on Cordelia's hand, and she was not allowed to flick it away. She had grown used to the ache of sitting on a hard wooden pew and being unable to shift her weight. It still hurt, but eventually her legs went to sleep, and the ache became a dull, all-over redness that was easier to ignore. Though her senses were dulled in obedience, her sense of touch stayed the strongest. Even when she was so far under that the world had a grey film around the edges, she could still feel her clothing and the touch of her mother's hand. And now, the fly's feet itched, which was bad, then tickled, which was worse. At the front of the church, the preacher was droning on. Cordelia had long since lost the thread. Lust and tithing were his two favourite topics. Probably it was one of those. Her mother took her to church every Sunday, and Cordelia was fairly certain that he had been preaching the same half-dozen sermons for the past year. Her eyes were the only muscles that she could control, so she was not looking at him, but down as far as she could. At the very bottom of her vision, she could see her hands folded in her lap, and the fly picking its way delicately across her knuckles. Her mother glanced at her and must have noticed that she was looking down. Cordelia's chin rose so that she could no longer see her hands. She was forced to study the back of the head of the man in front of her. His hair was thinning toward the back and was compressed down at the sides, as if he wore a hat most days. She did not recognize him, but that was no surprise. Since her days at school had ended, Cordelia only saw the other townsfolk when she went to church. Cordelia lost the tickling sensation for a moment and dared to hope that the fly was gone, but then the delicate web between her thumb and forefinger began to itch. Her eyes began to water at the sensation, and she blinked them furiously. Crying was not acceptable. That had been one of the first lessons of being made obedient. It would definitely not be acceptable in church, where other people would notice. Cordelia was 14 and too old to cry for seemingly no reason, because of course she could not tell anyone the reason. The fly crossed over to her other hand, each foot landing like an infinitesimal pinprick.